from some of the documents that we have to compile. You have to present the curriculum in terms of foundational, core, and electives in the SAQA registration form. Foundational, core, and electives. Okay, so you can read it actually from the tree if you design the tree to show all of those different elements. Okay. So I think that the knowledge tree is a very, very powerful way of presenting it. When Danella suggested it in our workshop, I remembered that in one of my textile books, many years ago, I actually went and searched for the book, and luckily I kept the book. There was the most amazing knowledge tree in there of textiles, showing exactly how textiles branch out the different fibers into different fiber types in terms of the classification, etc., etc. So you can use a knowledge tree even in a subject at a subject level, instead of just using it at a program level. And it's a visual way very often to make, the kind of total picture available to students. All right. What I'm going to be trying to do in a very short period of time is to give you a very quick overview of two key areas that influence the curriculum. And as we're approaching knowledge, skills, competencies, and capabilities, we can see that there's a knowledge society side to it, which relates to economics of knowledge, and I'll talk to you about that, which is prevalent in terms of the external pressures that we deal with in our curriculum and even now within the institution, with talk on Vision 2030 and the fourth industrial revolution. So you're asking yourself very often the question, where does this fit into what I'm supposed to be doing here? Okay, I hope I'm going to try and show you the two sides of this coin. So the one side is economics of knowledge. The other side is the sociology of knowledge, how knowledge is actually structured in your curriculum. And so I'm going to give you theoretical perspectives on both sides of this coin, which I'm going to have to do very quickly. This is extensive literature to cover in half an hour, almost impossible task. But I hope that it will give you just an idea as to how do these different parts fit together. We've given you the task to say, describe what does a professional worker do in your field of study. And you'll see how it relates to this, so you can go and answer these questions for yourself. Describe the nature of your field of study and the disciplinary ways of thinking that people are required to have. So what is it that you are trying to embed in your curriculum that graduates should leave with? And then from there, the interaction, therefore, between theory and practice in the curriculum. And then bringing it all together. How do the profile of the professional worker, the nature of the field of study, and the interaction between theory and practice influence your purpose statement, your exit level outcomes, and your program design? Okay, so ultimately, that's what you need to work with. So these are the 4 key questions you should be asking yourself. So the theoretical perspectives that I'm going to be presenting is merely just to give you an idea as to, if you read deeper into curriculum issues in literature, what is it that it tells us? Okay, so first of all, therefore, 2 sides of the same coin, economics of knowledge and sociology of knowledge. Both concepts impact on educational policy frameworks in South Africa, quite substantially, in fact, and very much so in terms of professional and vocational higher education curricula. Right, so first of all, economics of knowledge. Okay, what does the literature tell us? So these are some of the key theorists and key perspectives that have emerged over a period of time. So starting off at the top with Daniel Bell in his book on post-industrial society, where he talks about what is a post-industrial society about. And I think that's the important thing, is that we need to grasp first the era, the time that we live in, and the influence of that time on curriculum as well. And he explains this Now, in 1973, quite an amazing forward-looking book, if you read that book. I mean, he predicted things in there of what we're living with today. And I thought it was quite a forward-looking book. Moving from there into the focus on the information society, into the knowledge society, into the learning society. And so there are many different theorists that have spoken, and most of these are sociologists who have spoken about what is the knowledge society, giving it different labels. So today, the focus is shifted to the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is more recent work of Schwab from 2016, but we've also had a very kind of gloomy perspective on the risk society coming from Beck in 1992, from Castells on the network society with the prominence of ICT, and he's written 4 books. Makes quite interesting reading as well, which most of these have been reprinted several times, so it's still a very, very popular source. And then we see more moving towards learning with a focus on the learning economy, and I will talk about Linville and Johnson just now, and then also a focus on scientific professional knowledge economy, which comes from Brent. So you can see just how people, sociologists, have labeled the era that we live in differently, and have looked at different areas and perspectives of this time and how these somehow do have an influence on our curriculum. So the knowledge society therefore relies primarily on knowledge-based assets. This is what is coming out of all of this work, such as research and development, design software, human and organizational capital, rather than physical assets. And their properties such as machines, equipment, buildings, and vehicles. So moving therefore from the industrial society into the knowledge society, we therefore see this transition, this shift away from assets, physical assets, to human capital and what we know and what we can do with that knowledge, therefore, as the primary focus. And they all unpack that from different perspectives. It also focuses on the application of technology, which you know is very prominent in some of this work, rather than a transformation of raw material or the cheap exploitation of cheap labor. So if we look at what has happened in the industrial society, where it was all about getting people to produce goods faster, and the focus was very much on cheap labor and exploiting that, etc. The focus is now differently. The focus is therefore on what is the contribution that this individual can make in terms of what he or she knows and can do in the workplace. All right. So there are 2 types of knowledge that are emerging from this literature, and that is very well captured in a book by David Guile, where he talks about the 2 worlds view. The first one is on scientific, what they call scientific or theoretical knowledge. And here Daniel Bell's and Castell's book very much focuses on the scientific knowledge, the importance of the scientific knowledge within the knowledge society, where we have Gibbons, Lundvall, and Nonaka and Kyushi. Don't even know if I pronounce it Kyushi correctly, but these Japanese guys have written a book that has been used extensively discussing the importance of tacit knowledge. So we see therefore a shift almost away in the later part of this period towards the influence on tacit knowledge. Now if you look at your knowledge trees, you actually already have both of these knowledge types in your trees. You're making reference to tacit knowledge, you're making reference to scientific knowledge. And it's therefore a matter of what is this balance of these that need to be prominent. Because the conclusion that they've come to is it actually has to be both, and not just the one or the other. It has to be both. And I think that's a mistake we often make when we talk about programs at a lower level, like higher certificates, where we think it has to be predominantly about tacit and contextual knowledge. The reality is no program, no knowledge can only be tacit. Tacit depends on scientific. Okay, you draw your tacit knowledge from that. And so it's important, therefore, to acknowledge the presence of both of these. So the two worlds view is very prominent in our national policy documents. If you go and read the policy documents, you'll see that comes out very clearly. So Lagrange from Stellenbosch University said in an article in 2009, the knowledge economy relates to economics of knowledge, while knowledge society relates to sociology of knowledge. And we actually bring both of these together in a curriculum. And sorry, the knowledge economy relates to the economics of knowledge, and the knowledge society relates to sociology of knowledge. And I'll unpack that a little bit as we go along. But here's an example. This is a quote from the white paper on post-school education and training, where it says, education has long been recognized as providing a route out of poverty for individuals and a way of promoting equality and opportunity, or equality of opportunity. The achievement of greater social justice is closely dependent on equitable access by all sections of the population to quality education. Just as important, widespread and good quality education and training will allow more rapid economic, social and cultural development, etc. So you can see, therefore, how the economics of knowledge has a powerful voice in our national policy frameworks. All right. So if we now look at, and this is mostly the terminology that gets used in literature as well, this distinction, therefore, between explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. And explicit knowledge very often associated with your scientific knowledge. So it's very often conceptual. It's context independent, although Frederica and I had a conversation this morning saying, is it really context independent? Do we ever really have context independent knowledge? Well, in our view, not really. Okay? But let's say it's predominantly context independent, and it's objective, rational, scientific in nature, and very often technical in nature, depending on the field of study. So it's therefore easier to articulate, it's easier to look to structure, it's easier to document, and you can present it in text and tables and diagrams, and that is what we do with what we share with our students. Okay, because explicit knowledge is an easier medium to communicate. It's learned, therefore, through instruction, recitation, and repetition, which is what you do in your classrooms. It's easy to recognize, it's easy to codify, to formalize, to store, to share, to communicate, and to use. Okay? And therefore, predominantly, we draw on explicit knowledge when we compile our curriculum. And then it can be transferred in various forms, and it relates to know why. Okay, which is the strategic knowledge. Why are we making certain decisions? But it also relates predominantly to know what. Okay, the conceptual, the theoretical, models, theories, principles, etc. of the fields of study that we draw on. Where on the other hand, if we look at tacit knowledge, it's situated, it's context dependent, it's cumulative in the way that it builds. Okay, it's far more subjective and more based on experiential learning. It's therefore highly personalized, which is the reason why those will look different. Okay? Because you were drawing mostly on your tacit knowledge this morning in compiling that. So it becomes highly personalized. It's your view, it's how you approach it, it's your experience, drawing on your prior learning, etc., and experiences, etc. So therefore, it's unstructured. It's very often difficult to see when you assess your students, less easy to codify, less easy to investigate, to formalize, to capture, and to communicate accurately, which is why it becomes so difficult to assess it in our curriculum as well. It's very often transferred through conversation and narratives, which is why digital storytelling and things like that become such a powerful way of dealing with that tacit knowledge. And it relates mostly to know how and to know who. All right. So it relates to what Paul Yanni said in 1996 in his book on tacit knowledge that says, or the tacit dimension, he says, we know more than we can tell. And that's really true. Okay. All right. So if we would translate this now into what do we see in terms of the forms of knowledge in the economics of knowledge from a knowledge economy perspective, then we see that about 30% of the totality is about explicit knowledge. But there's a huge portion that relates, therefore, to the tacit knowledge. And these percentages are quoted over and over and over and over and over again in different literature. So I thought that just to make it real for you, in terms of explicit knowledge, there's Daniel Bell talks about scientific knowledge as the axial principle. Okay, so very much positioning explicit knowledge very center stage in the shift to a service economy and to the development of specialized occupations. Similarly, Castos uses this definition of knowledge, which is actually Bell's definition of knowledge. And what does he say about knowledge? Knowledge as a set of organized statements of facts or ideas that have been worked up through a process of reasoned judgment or empirical study and communicated in some systematic form. Okay, so that gives you a good definition to work with when you talk about explicit knowledge. But then when we start looking at what do people say about why is tacit knowledge so important in the knowledge economy, then we get the work of Mode 2 knowledge production from Gibbons, where the focus is very much on the context of application and on transdisciplinarity. And likewise, on the other side, the shift to a learning economy, realizing that people need to learn throughout their life, linking to the lifelong learning process, but also in the organizations we work. These are learning organizations. And that's really what the focus of Nanaka was about and colleagues was about, was on what happens in an organization? How does knowledge get created in an organization? And here they distinguish between the epistemological dimension and the ontological dimension. Again, two dimensions that we need to deal with when we develop professional or occupational curricula, because they need to be prevalent in our curricula. So we can say it's about knowing, it's about doing, and it's about being. Right, that's basically what this text actually tells you. Okay, this is where these perspectives are actually coming from. All right, so I thought I'm going to give you a little exercise to do for a few minutes. There are 4 broad categories. So if you would glance at your knowledge tree that you have up on the wall, do you have prevalence of know what? Do you have prevalence of know why? Maybe the know why is a little silent in some of them. Okay, it's very much about the what, not so much about the why. Do you have prevalence of the know how and the know who? Because in learning organizations, it's about networked expertise. You operating in an organization where networked expertise is incredibly important. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that nobody tells you who you should be speaking to, about what, for what reason. Okay, and in the world we live in today, that becomes a very important part. The reality is our curricula are actually very silent about that. Okay, so we don't often actually focus on the network expertise in our curricula. Very important components, therefore, for our students to learn. But it does feature in our new CPUT graduate attributes, the relational nature. Okay, and so I think that's important, therefore, for us to ensure that we include these social relations, the in our curricula as well. How does it work in a work environment? How does it work within the learning field, a study that you work in? How does it even work in a disciplinary context? Okay. All right, so take a minute, think quickly. Do you have all 4 of those? Can you maybe stand this up? I've given this in a little table, so you can take it home and you can go and think about it. All right, can we get a sense? Do you agree with me that maybe some of the know why is a little silent in your knowledge trees? Or do you disagree with me on the know why? Is there sufficient evidence of the conceptual knowledge? Is there sufficient evidence of the interrelationship among the basic elements within a larger structure? Okay. Okay. And is it maybe a little silent about the network expertise? About the know-who, the social dynamics? There is prevalence about teamwork and problem solving. I've seen somewhere there. We were assuming that some of that problem solving will take place in a group kind of context. But I do think that it's important, therefore, that you need to use this as a checklist, almost to say, from a knowledge economy perspective, these are the 4 broad conceptual frameworks that we should be drawing. All right. I'm going to push ahead because we still have some slides to cover. So my suggestion, therefore, the presentation is already available. Barbara has it available, so she will upload it to my classroom for you. But that you look at this and then look at your knowledge trees that you even develop within your departments and compare them. All right. So moving on to the other side of the coin, which is really where the serious curriculum theories come in. The economics of the knowledge very often informs some of what people then critique from a sociology of knowledge perspective. And so here, one of the prominent critiques came from Basil Bernstein, and then more contextualized in terms of vocational professional curricula. We have input from Barnett, not Ronald Barnett, for those of you who know some of the higher education literature, but Michael Barnett. Then Chris Winberg and colleagues here at CPUT wrote a paper I forgot to put the date in 2012, which appeared in a Kagisanu publication of the CHE. And then Lisa Wheelerhan's well-known work, Why Knowledge Matters, okay, social realist perspective on curriculum, and then taking that further into Matten and into Shea. So I'm going to dip very quickly in and out of some of these very prominent curriculum theorists. Okay, so starting off therefore with Bernstein, why is this frame, this pedagogic device as he calls it, why is this helpful? It's helpful because it helps you to see that there's this recontextualization process from the field of production into the curriculum, into your pedagogic practice. And so you're drawing on the field of production where knowledge is produced. Okay, now the important thing is that knowledge is not just produced in higher education institutions and in research institutes. It's produced in organizations, in firms, in schools, in wherever. So the knowledge economy, therefore, broadened that scope. And so therefore, you can't look at the field of production narrowly just in terms of your discipline. Okay? So looking at those sites where new knowledge is produced, what are you drawing from? What are you taking from the field of production then into your curriculum? How are you recontextualizing that? Because clearly, you can't just present that body of knowledge to students just like that. You have to be selective. This is appropriate. This isn't so appropriate. This is too advanced. This I can use here, etc. So you go through a process of considering these very carefully. All right. Then in your curriculum, you recontextualize that again in terms of what the nature of your field is. And here you're drawing basically on the one side, you're drawing on the discipline. On the other side, you're drawing from the actual workplace. Okay, and so in the case of a vocational and professional higher education curriculum, it faces both ways. It faces, therefore, to the discipline, but it faces also to the workplace. And that's why knowledge of what happens in the workplace and the influences of the knowledge economy is so important for curricula, the type of curricula that we develop. Then from there, you consider, once you've developed this curriculum, how you're going to teach it. Okay, this is where your teaching and learning strategy and your assessment strategy comes in. How are students actually going to engage with this curriculum? And so, drawing on Ashwin's translation, knowledge as research, knowledge as curriculum, and then knowledge as student understandings. And so you're actually working across all three of these in designing a curriculum, because now you may be more on that side, now you may be thinking more here as your process of developing and conceptualizing your curriculum changes. So today, we're here. Okay. But from this point onwards, session 6 onwards, you're going to be here predominantly, because it's going to be about teaching and learning strategies and stuff like that. Okay. So there's a lot written about Bernstein's work, so you can go and read more about that. But what I want to do is just focus very quickly on this facing both ways concept, which came across in an article of Michael Barnett in 2006, drawing on Bernstein's work, and then also Lisa Whelan makes reference to that in her work. She says vocational curricula must face both ways. So, to the occupationally recontextualized disciplinary knowledge, and to the field of practice. So here, in this space, is your recontextualized disciplinary knowledge. It's already been recontextualized from the field of knowledge production now into a discipline, okay? And you're drawing on that. Okay, because your field of study, your program is located within that. But yet, it's not only informed by that, it's also informed of what happens in the workplace. So in the workplace, you need to think of the sector of the industry, you need to think of the kinds of companies, whether they're public or private enterprises, what's the nature of the workplace, what's the nature of the employers. You need to define the kinds of functions that this individual is going to be performing within this workplace. And you need to think about the knowledge and skills that they will require, but they also, what are the tools and the methods and the procedures and techniques and equipment, etc., all of those things that they're going to use in executing the tasks on a daily basis. And so your curriculum need to make provision for that as well as for this, and therefore facing both ways. So, at a postgraduate diploma level, it will face more towards that. Because why? It's an entry towards postgraduate qualifications. So you need to ensure, this is the last opportunity you will have to ensure that students have a solid disciplinary base. Okay. But if you're developing a higher certificate, it's going to lean more towards this, and it's going to draw on that. Okay. And so, to explain that, therefore, in a little bit more detail, I'm going to skip this slide because I've already said that. I think it's important to just look quickly at the knowledge structures. Now, Bernstein was very good at defining these knowledge structures, but yet in his formulation of it, we sit with kind of a binary divide, that as if on the one hand you have theory, on the other hand you have practice. So in the way that he describes it, he talks of vertical and horizontal discourse. He defines horizontal discourse as your everyday kind of common practice and kind of conversations you have on a daily basis with people. So it's a kind of common sense stuff, the stuff that we share with people on a daily basis. But then we have complex practice. Okay, that needs particular terminology as well in order to communicate effectively. And so it's very often also more transdisciplinary in nature. All right, it cuts across different contexts. So in terms of horizontal discourse, therefore, we can therefore distinguish already between everyday practice and complex practice. On the other hand, the vertical discourse is really about two different types, where he distinguishes between vertical knowledge structures and horizontal knowledge structures. Now, mathematical sciences and health sciences, many of the science programs draw very much on vertical knowledge structures because you build layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of knowledge. Students can't just jump to somewhere. They have to build that knowledge. You have to build that knowledge. Physics being a very good example of that, because it's about introducing students into the disciplinary way of thinking of that field. And you scaffold the knowledge carefully, one layer upon another. Chris Winwick used to always, when she presented this, would show, multi-story building for vertical knowledge structures. Where horizontal knowledge structures is like you're being invited almost to a buffet lunch. And there are all these different dishes put out there, all very attractive. Now you need to figure out what of these really apply. And that's kind of what sociology and many of those kinds of fields, political science and those fields are like. They're different models. They're different theories. They're ample of them. What are you choosing? What are you selecting for your curriculum and why? Okay, and so that makes sometimes structuring some of those programs a little bit more difficult because you now need to ask yourself the question also, whose knowledge counts here? Okay, so that's where the interesting debates about decolonization, etc. of the curriculum comes into play. All right. All right, but that being said, that kind of dichotomy of, theory practice is a little problematic because how do we use that? How do we translate that into curriculum terms? So he developed legitimation code theory consisting basically of 5 dimensions as a conceptual toolkit to be used for very prominently for curriculum analysis purposes as well. And here I think the semantics dimension is particularly helpful to analyze curriculum. And I'm going to show you just now how you can actually do that. So it's breaking away then from this false dichotomy of theory practice as if these are two different things that don't really relate to each other. The reality is they do. So Mathin's knowledge code fields that he's then developed shows us that there is what he calls a semantic plane. Okay, so it opens up far more possibilities that's visible through Bernstein's conceptualization. And just in simple terms, if you look at semantic gravity, it's about the external relations of knowledge practices. And it means that the degree to which the meaning relates to its context, whether that be social or symbolic. So if you have minus, it's a weakening, and if you have plus, it's a strengthening. And in terms of semantic density, it really relates to the internal relations of knowledge practices, and it relates to the condensation of the concepts, the theories, the models, etc., the conceptual knowledge, therefore. And again, you have a minus and a plus. So now it means you can actually start positioning the knowledge within the semantic plane. And so Sue Ellen Shea adapted that in a paper in 2013 where she looked at theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. This is the two kind of opposite poles. So here, context-independent, complex systems, very conceptually very dense. Here, context-dependent, situated type knowledge, procedural very often, and practical in nature. Okay, so the two opposites. But where we positioned is actually here. So we're drawing from that knowledge, but we're also drawing from this knowledge. And the other interesting thing is, based on what you've shown this morning, you draw from here as well, into here. Because this is where your generic transferable knowledge sits, in this quadrant. Okay, so you're also drawing on that. I'm going to get to you just now. Okay, so just hold your question for a minute. So that's the knowledge code fields. But if we would translate those knowledge code fields then into a curriculum framework, then I think the curriculum framework described in the paper of Sue Ellen Shea in 2013 is very, very helpful. And this shows you just how she's actually labeled the different quadrants. So I'm going to show it to you visually. So if your curriculum is more theoretical in nature, it will be positioned here. So it relates to the knowledge code fields. It's more practical in nature, with more of a focus on what needs to happen in the workplace. The logic of the curriculum, therefore, is practice. It will be positioned more towards that side. But here, you're drawing on the theory, but yet you're embedding it in practice. So it's that interaction between the two here that becomes really important. And then you have that quadrant 1, which Sue Ellen Shea does not actually label very well. She says that she has not yet, in the article, she says she has not yet kind of got her mind around what this should be. But my reading of that is really that's how generic writer attributes. Okay, so it's what academic writing, it's basic numeracy skills, it's it's teamwork, it's those kinds of elements that we're also bringing into the curriculum there. All right, now you say, oh, that's a lot of theory. What does that mean in practical terms? What am I going to do with this? Yes, you can actually do something with it. So I'm going to show you 5 slides of examples of how semantics can very well be used. And these concepts can well be used to analyze a curriculum. So I worked for a long time with the nursing staff and predominantly at WCCN before the split between CPUT and WCCN. So I helped them to develop 3 curricula, higher certificate, a diploma, and a bachelor's degree. And so I took the curricula and first of all, I grouped it into broad knowledge areas, which I think is the first important thing you need to do. From that knowledge tree, what are the broad knowledge areas that are emerging from that? And you'll see that these are predominantly explicit knowledge. Okay, this is mostly your explicit knowledge that forms the broad knowledge areas. So I'm not going to go into the detail because this is spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of data. So I'm just going to show you the different types of knowledge areas and they're color coded. Okay, so if you would then, this is the scope of practice of a registered nurse, meant for the diploma in nursing. So it's about basic nursing care for the treatment and rehabilitation of common health problems. So you can see, if you look at the terminology and that's being used here, it's a generalist type focus. Okay, so the person is introduced into the field, has a very broad knowledge of the different things, must be able to work, take responsibility for nursing care with individuals, communities, groups and communities, practice safe nursing care, devise a nursing care plan for people with particular health conditions in all of these different kinds of settings, whether it be individuals, groups or communities, etc. All right. So we developed a curriculum. Then we said, okay, well, what does this tell us? Is this curriculum balanced in terms of theory and practice? How do we know that? Okay, so I took the semantic plane and I took the quadrants of Sue Ellen Shea's framework. And what you see is when you actually map it to the plane, what it then looks like. So you can see there's a prominent slant towards the practical quadrant. Okay. There's a little prevalence here of theoretical knowledge, sitting very much in the physical and biological science, the red dots, anatomy, physiology, the serious knowledge that students need to have. And then you see, so interestingly enough, that there's not that much coming into this quadrant, but there's quite a number of them there. Now, the size of the dots is in relation to the credit value of the subject within the qualification. Obviously, now subjects have been grouped together in order to show it visually, but it shows you basically a visual map of that. So, okay, so this looks like, this is okay. It's a diploma program, it's generalist, it's quite practical in nature, you're drawing on appropriate theory, and you have these green dots indicating the clinical and community science components, where the workplace learning components are with the blue as well. That looks really reasonably okay. Okay. All right. So it helps you, therefore, to interrogate whether your curriculum is positioned in terms of the subjects and the credit values and the knowledge areas behind those subjects, whether it is positioned within the right quadrants. Okay. So then I did the same for the Bachelor of Nursing. And now here you can see it's a 4-year professional degree. It's comprehensive nursing care and management, importantly, all right, which obviously also influence the curriculum significantly, in my opinion, negatively, okay, because I don't think that so much nursing management skills should be required in this curriculum. But you can see, therefore, that it's more comprehensive. Again, quite a scope in terms of the different healthcare settings, etc. And when we mapped that, my expectation was that the bulk of it should sit here. The reality is it didn't actually show that. Showed still that we have a theory-practice divide. And we're not actually overcoming that theory-practice divide in the curriculum. It's theory in the classroom, practice in the hospital or in the clinical setting. And we did not actually achieve a more balanced profile. All right. Now, I want to raise another little interesting question. So I'm going to go just quickly back. Look at the red dots. Just take the red dots. Look at the red dots here. That's biological, physical and biological science, and the size of the dots. And then compare where the red dots are sitting in the bachelor's degree. A lot more, much bigger, and scattered. Okay, how are you going to articulate students from the one to the other? Because the nature of the knowledge is actually significantly different. So, in my opinion, articulation is a myth. Yeah. Because you're actually setting, in some cases, students up for failure. If you do the real curriculum analysis, it shows it. Which is actually what this paper was about. It was challenging articulation as if knowledge is knowledge, it's the same thing. It's not. It's not the same. Okay, and the analysis actually shows that. All right. Okay, so that in a nutshell, I think, was a very, very quick whisk through the curriculum theories. There was a question here. Can you remember your question? Okay. Shane?
Marianne, I totally am with you with what you're saying. Just bring back all the memories of my nightmare of my doctorate. But what I wanted to say was, the question I'm really thinking about is, when that expansion of knowledge now to the next level, and we stand articulation is the problem. So even though we're looking at something like the postgraduate diploma, which is talking about specialization, etc., and I constantly get this Precious thing, but it doesn't have to flow from the BTEC, or does it? Does it have to flow? Because
Well, the thing is, if it doesn't, you have a gap.
that's the problem. But they say
That's the reality. I mean, if you would take, just the examples, if you take your diploma and then your advanced diploma and then your postgraduate diploma and you would map it to a semantic plane, and you look at where your broad knowledge areas for the core components of your curriculum. This is the important thing. The red dots is the core components of nursing. Okay. If they are positioned differently, okay, what then happens to that student who you're going to be articulating? How are they going to bridge that gap? They did not have the same curriculum, not the same emphasis on different things either in the curriculum than what another student had. And so you're expecting of that student now to find a way of bridging that gap themselves. So it's good, therefore, to map it.
But just to add, sorry, Marianne, for the postgraduate, there's also the assumption that people will be working. That many of the people coming will have the experience, as well as what our BTECs would have had. So that is the...
So you see, what happens is we rely on our teaching and learning strategies to overcome the gap. We hope we're covering enough in our classrooms, we teach enough, we talk about enough, and the students will be able to figure it out themselves. Okay, but the reality in curriculum terms, it actually presents a major challenge. All right. Okay, I'm way over my time. You have the 2 quadrants, the 2 slides. You can go and check this out for yourself. Ask yourself these questions, even if you don't map it to a semantic plane. But you can ask yourself the questions around, is it more theoretical in nature? Is it more vocational? Professional in nature? Is it more practical? Is it more generic? Higher education should never have a curriculum that dominates in generic. Okay, that's a short course you do when you're in the workplace and you need note-taking skills or, minute-taking skills or whatever, things like that. That's not the kind of stuff that a curriculum in higher education should be dominant in ever. All right. Thank you.
May I quickly ask, that slide of yours that shows that the theory is there, the practical is there, but in that one, that 4th quadrant at the bottom. On the right.
Okay, sorry, I've jumped now. Yeah, I know which one.
But where the theory and the practical doesn't mix that much, is it because that they are not really applying the theory in the practical when they go out to practical, that they just do?
Okay, I must just say the difficulty with the curriculum analysis. The difficulty with the curriculum analysis is you're working with the curriculum documents. So you can only extract the curriculum from what is written text. So it's what is in your subject guide, what is in your curriculum document. So what I used here was the subject information templates. Okay, I do at this stage do not yet have. This is a intended curriculum. You do not yet have access to the actual learning activities that students would do or to the assessment tasks that students would do. So therefore, it's an intended curriculum focus. But if it tells you in what you've designed, you sit with a problem, then surely it should raise questions about how you're going to overcome this in your teaching and learning strategy. How are you going to ensure better interaction between theory and practice? Right?
Vocational and professional curriculum. Can you just elaborate on that a little more with examples?
Well, all our qualifications should fall predominantly in this quadrant. Okay. So you will draw on the theories, the principles, the fundamental principles to the fields, to the models that you use, the concepts that you use. I mean, these are very often factual type knowledge that you would share with students. Okay, you draw on that. That's where the knowledge comes from, the field of production. Okay, so we've recontextualized that now for the purpose of your curriculum, but that's really the knowledge. The reality is just you can't just present that and then hope that the students can make the transition to the workplace themselves. You need to facilitate that transition to the workplace. So you need to draw on that theoretical knowledge and embed that in the actual practice. So you need to have a good enough understanding of the actual practice of that field of study. Hence the task I've given you. What should a knowledge worker, a graduate, know in your field of study? What is it that they're going to be required to do? The better you understand that practice, okay, the more you're able to make this link between the theory and the practice, and you're able to draw on the appropriate theories and embed it in practice in your curriculum. Ryan, your hand was up.
Marianne, if I can just summarize what you said, just my own
Yeah.
understanding of what you're saying is that what you did there is you took an existing curriculum and evaluated it according to legitimation code theory. But that curriculum wasn't necessarily written according to legitimation code theory. It was just written.
Yeah, it's just written. Curriculum, remember, just LCT is a conceptual toolkit. It's a practical theory. So it's a way of showing the data.
What you could do is from scratch use LCT to write the curriculum.
You can.
And,
yeah,
and
you can.
What we look, and so when you say our majority of our qualifications should fall within the vocational professional quadrant, that's for a UOT. That's for University of Technology.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily for bachelor of arts.
No. A BA and a BCom will be here.
Okay.
Little bit here, mostly there. Very little there, very little there.
So going on for that, fundamentally, there's probably something wrong with the subject title, the theory of, or
the problem is the labeling is always difficult, and I think just that's the reason why it's so important to write a good subject description to explain that label that you've given to it. But the labeling is always difficult. I think when you work in vocational professional curricula, what you label it is always problematic. Okay. Because the problem is also, how do you show the logical progression? If you take anatomy and physiology in our health science programs, it doesn't go anatomy 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it goes anatomy 1, maybe 2. Then it goes in a recontextualized format into another subject. And you mix it with other components. Because now the shift has gone into practice. Right, and so much more when it gets to the 4th year. Right, then you add the research components and you start bringing in, a little bit of the field of production, the kind of theoretical concepts back into the curriculum again. It gets hugely complex.
I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Can I just say that's one of our biggest stumbling blocks with our PG dip, because the entrance requirement is a degree.
I'll stop it now. My computer just froze for a minute, so no. Where is it now again? Stop.
It's already stopped.
Has it stopped?
Okay, stop.